Very much so. The birth of the modern-day homosexual movement began right after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. He was assassinated April 4th, 1968. In 1972, right after black people allegedly got civil rights, the power structure, the American social order, began to devise a way to rid itself of the black menace, and that is to say the unwanted 40 million black people in America. They came up with all types of strategies. In fact, there was a federal program that I'm sure you brothers may have heard of called Global 2000, which was initiated during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, where he put together a group of professionals, white scientific racists, to come up with a program for population control. The goal of Global 2000 was to reduce the population of Africans globally by 50%. That was the goal. So we see that homosexuality in 1972, that was the first time that it was being pushed as a normal behavior. The Rockefeller World Population Council and Planned Parenthood International. Now, this is the same Planned Parenthood that gives black women abortion. This is the same Planned Parenthood that was started by a racist white female, Margaret Sanger, who out of her own mouth said that the chief purpose of Planned Parenthood was to reduce unwanted black babies. It was Planned Parenthood and the Rockefeller World Population Council that got together and decided that one of the best ways to reduce the black population is not to kill them, but to prevent them from being born in the first place. And not only to prevent black children from being born, but to prevent black men from having sex with black women. So they took it a step further. They said we can use the AIDS to kill black people who are already here, okay? But it would be a whole lot more advantageous to the agenda of white supremacy if we could prevent conception between a black man and black woman altogether. So homosexuality, the wicked genius of homosexuality as a movement is that it prevents conception. So you don't have to get abortions. You don't have to lock them up. You don't have to miseducate them. You don't have to psychotropic drug them. You don't have to do anything but prevent the man and the woman from coming together so there will be no spiritual conception. So that was in 1972 that idea was put forth. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association, which has a conference every single year where they debate the different diagnoses that are inside of the DSM. The DSM is the Bible of psychology and psychiatry. Everything we diagnose comes out of that book. It is published by the American Psychiatric Association. So every year there's a convention. In 1973, the gay organizations decided that they was going to bum rush the American Psychiatric Association's convention. So what they did was they boycotted outside of the convention, stating that the American Psychiatric Association was a discriminatory group because in its DSM it listed homosexuality as a sexual deviance. It was listed as mental disorder 302.0, I believe the code was. And it had been listed as a mental disorder, okay, for the entire time of history up until they decided to take it out. When was the first DSM issued that did not include homosexuality as an illness? That was April of 1974, a few months before I was born. Up until April of 1974, when the 6th edition of the DSM was published, homosexuality was an illness. 300.20, homosexuality listed under the categories of sexual deviancy. So how did they get it pulled out? The homosexual groups, using some homosexual psychiatrists from inside the APA, stole the mailing list to all of the psychiatrists in America. Once the annual convention puts an idea forward, so the idea that was put forward in 73 was that we should take homosexuality out of the book. It's not fair to call this an illness. It is a normal lifestyle. But guess what? Many of the white psychiatrists did not buy that nonsense. They said, hell no. That is a mental disorder, and it needs to stay a mental disorder. So the homosexuals, talking to the homosexual psychiatrists, only a few inside of the APA, they said, well, what can we do to somehow get the population of APA members to vote to get it out. They stole the mailing list. And when they stole the mailing list, they sent propaganda letters to every psychiatrist in America telling them that it was not fair to include homosexuality as a mental disorder. The problem was the psychiatrists who got this letter didn't know that it was coming from the homosexual groups. So they was able to garner enough support to have homosexuality voted out of the DSM. That took place at the end of 73, and in 1974. I want y'all to see how short this whole movement has been, gentlemen. This movement has only been since April of 74. I'm 36.
What's also interesting is the timeline that it coincides with the quote-unquote invention of hip-hop.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And
which was in
it
73.
also coincides with the discovery or creation of HIV/AIDS. Yes, sir.
Which also coincides with the genetic creation of what we know today as crack cocaine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All of these strategies, all of these extermination strategies grow out of the Global 2000 initiative. They grow out of the think tanks of the Rockefeller World Population Council, the Trilateral Commission. Because remember now, let's stay with that timeline. 72, the World Population Council and Planned Parenthood say homosexuality should be treated as normal, and if it's treated as normal, it can be pushed as a normal behavior to prevent black conception. In 1973, the homosexuals bum rushed the APA convention. They steal the list. They sent out propaganda letters to all the APA members, influencing them to vote homosexuality out of the DSM. The sixth printing of the DSM came out in April of 74, and for the first time, homosexuality was not listed as abnormal. The same year, 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger published his National State Security Memorandum 200, which focused on what? Population control. They said that the expanding growth of black birth was a United States security issue. And in the NSM 200 or 2000 that he wrote, you will see that they targeted a dozen African nations for serious population control reduction. And guess what, brothers? Every country in Africa that Henry Kissinger singled out as having a black growth spurt that needed to be put down by America leads the world in two areas, HIV and homosexuality.
Can I fast forward